It feels like yearly there's a big portion of fans that have an issue with the NFL Pro Bowl, the NBA All Star Game, and these events that are supposed to seem really exciting to be a celebration of the sport with the best players in the world all playing at the same time. But so often lately, there seems to be a sense of fan apathy. The NHL, however, they did things a little bit differently, and it worked out very well. Welcome back to State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts, and today we are talking about the success of the Four Nations face-off. First off, I want to kind of establish the position of hockey in this country. In the U.S., we had a big four in major sports, but with the rise of popularity in soccer, I would argue that we have five now. And so you've got football, you've got basketball, you've got baseball, and you've got hockey, you've got soccer. And football and basketball, those two are really the top dogs, especially football. That just captivates the American market like no other. And then at number three, you might have some people argue for baseball, just as a result of how classic it is. But I would argue from everything that I've seen, hockey has taken that number three spot. And truthfully, I think it makes perfect sense. I think hockey is a perfect example of what we kind of enjoy in our sports over here in America, because our most popular by far is football, and relative to soccer or basketball or baseball, that's a pretty physical sport. And you could absolutely say the same thing about hockey, whether it's players actually getting into fights quite frequently or just the big hits that you might see during the duration of a game. I think it fits quite well with kind of what we enjoy seeing with sports as a medium of entertainment over here. And so it makes perfect sense, really, for hockey to be able to slide with that number three. And what I really saw from people with this Four Nations face-off was a lot of people who may not take much of an interest in hockey. I myself am not a huge fan. I have season tickets for the local hockey team, and I go out there to support. I love the BOK Center. I think it's a really fun venue. But I'm not head over heels with hockey. I don't necessarily watch the NHL. I was in the fantasy hockey league last year, and all my friends we didn't watch hockey at all. We just kind of guessed based off the ranking and stuff. So I'm a fairly casual fan of hockey, but I do enjoy it from time to time. But even beyond just the casual fans who might take a glance at it from now and again, there were people I've seen that have never really expressed an interest in hockey whatsoever that were tuned in to this, at the bare minimum, the final game between the U.S. and Canada. You had major sports pages posting about it on Instagram, posting about hockey when so often they don't. So often it's kind of neglected. And I think a big part of the appeal was just kind of this idea of rooting for your national team. We see it with the biggest sporting event in the world, the World Cup, in which these players from their individual clubs, they will play to represent a nation. And that can make a lot of fans, it can level up their passion for the game, because now they're not just rooting for a team that they might have picked based off their location, or they like the mascot, or they like the colors. No, they're rooting based off of the sense of national identity that they have, their pride in their country that they want to see come out on top. And so with that, we a lot of people wanted to see the Americans beat Canada, especially with hockey. I think that's really important because the NHL is kind of a merger between both Canada and the United States in terms of the conglomerate of teams like the Toronto Maple Leafs. And so a league that kind of is multinational, to see those two teams face off in the championship, I think that got a lot of people excited, and especially for that national aspect of it, it's something that's been proven to work in the past with stuff like the World Cup. I think that's really cool to see. And something like this is really going to solidify hockey as perhaps the number three sport in the US. And then we get to that. So I just talked about, uniting the country and all of that, and people that were really interested when perhaps they truly never were before. But then we get into how this affects the NHL. And this can't be an annual thing. It's not going to be an annual thing as opposed to the traditional All Star break. But I want to give the NHL all of their flowers for just being able to go out there and experiment a little bit, try something new. Because so often there's been this growing sentiment among the NBA All Star game, among the Pro Bowl, where fans just don't really seem to care anymore. I had a video come out about a week or so ago about the NBA's All Star game, And in my opinion, there's a little bit of a loss of childhood wonder with it, where you grow up and everything as a kid seems so larger than life, right? And sure, people have their issues with the way that the game itself is played, but in general, you don't necessarily worry about that as a kid. You can see LeBron and Steph playing on the same team, right? But as you grow up, the game doesn't necessarily develop alongside you, and you kind of just see it as, this big marketing thing. And yes, it's a celebration of basketball, but the big game isn't one with a lot of competitiveness to it, right? So you kind of look at it more pessimistically than you might have done as a child. But with the NHL and going out here and changing things, it allows for you to bring back that portion of the audience that might, with age, grow a little bit disinterested. It allows you to say, "Hey, we're trying something new. Come check out the Four Nations Face Off." And I think that got a lot of people really tuned in and enjoying the hockey aspect of it. Which that's a whole another thing with the topic of football or basketball, right? Even if the big celebrity all-star game, this momentous thing with a break mid-season for the NBA, at the end of the season for the NFL, people are going to be tuned into football or basketball regardless, right? By far the two largest sports in the nation. But for something like hockey, you've got to do something to draw people in and something that's going to really captivate them. And I think that this was really able to do just that. And even someone who might not watch the NFL, they might watch the Pro Bowl just to see the celebration of players. And then that might not necessarily encourage them to go out there and watch a series of regular season games, because at the end of the day, there is a lack of competitiveness in that. But with this Four Nations face off, you had the intrinsic competition just based off players playing for their nation, the pride in their country. And then you also had the fact that it was more so a real game of hockey. The Pro Bowl has plenty of competitions mixed within it. You had people who've never punted before, like Marlon Humphrey, in a punting contest. With the NBA this year, it was kind of broken up into a tournament, but with the NHL's Four Nations Face-Off, this was a pure hockey game. And so something with that, if people really enjoyed it and they saw the passion from the fans that was really aided by, rooting for their country, they see the passion that is entwined with the sport and they actually enjoyed what they saw, what they watched, that can encourage them more than, the NBA's All-Star Tournament, the Pro Bowl with all these various contests. Something like this, that's a proper celebration of the game. I think that's really just a way to go for the NHL and something I love to see. And it could really bring fans in because if they enjoyed this game, they're going to enjoy other NHL games. You don't have necessarily the national aspect to it, but at the end of the day, you enjoyed a pure game of hockey, and so you can enjoy plenty of others that the NHL is putting on. So I love to see that in terms of an actual celebration of the game. That's perfect. And I think that with that, the NHL could very well see an increase in viewership and interest and be that solidified number 3 option in the country just because people watched this game and they were really invested and they were, actually watching a game of hockey in kind of its natural state. So this has been fairly short. This is going to come out sometime Monday night. I don't know if it's going to be before the game I go to or after, but I'm going to see the Timberwolves and the Thunder play. And so with that, I'm going to have a video out on Wednesday talking about that game. But to just kind of wrap this up, make this a short and sweet Monday night segment, I just want to give the NHL all the credit in the world for experimenting. So often we just don't see that with these all-star games. They're supposed to be a celebration of the sport, and so often you do things to draw people away from the sport. You create a variation of the game that we just don't see in the regular season. You have all these contests in the Pro Bowl. You have the tournament for the NBA's All-Star Weekend, and credit to them for switching it up. Sure, that might draw in casual fans, but something like this, the NHL's Four Nations Face-Off, and doing something different from most All-Star breaks and actually celebrating the game, I think that can draw a lot of people in and make people kind of respect the integrity of hockey more, become more invested in the sport. I think this was a wonderful showing from the NHL, and it's going to get a lot of people tuned in about hockey that may have not been before. So, what a great showing. All the flowers to the NHL for coming up with this and executing well as well. Just having a pure game of hockey that is going to entertain both the hardcore fans and people on the outside looking in because of all the competitiveness of it. So often, something like the Pro Bowl or the All Star game, even if it does draw in the casual fans, it doesn't necessarily draw in the hardcore fans. They don't enjoy seeing a game with a lack of defense in the NBA's standards, right? Where the players just seem to not care that much. Or the Pro Bowl with all of its gimmicks, but this was a pure game of hockey in the final. And you had passion from both sides rooting for their country, and it was just a pure game of hockey. And sometimes that's all you need. You don't need the extravagant, oh, look at how flashy our sport can be. Sometimes you just need a proper celebration of the game. And that's what this Four Nations face-off was. And it's amazing to see. And something that if you're the NBA or you're the NFL, looking and seeing at how many people were actually interested in this that may have never watched hockey before and that may be converted into some NHL fans, I think you could learn a lesson or two from this tournament in kind of the way that the NHL went about celebrating the game that really the All-Star break should be about. And with all that being said, thank you very much for listening. This has been State of the Association. I'm your host, Nash Roberts, and this was the success of the Four Nation Face-Off.